First reading is from the first letter of Peter, chapter 1, verses 18 to 21. For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot. He indeed was foreordained before the foundation of the world, but was manifest in these last times for you, who through him believe in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. Go back a few hundred years to Jeremiah, chapter 17, verses 5 to 9. This is what the Lord says. Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws strength from mere flesh, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. That person will be like a bush in the wastelands. They will not see prosperity when it comes. They will dwell in the parched places of the desert, in a salt land where no one lives. But blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. They will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it?
Okay, hello, good morning, welcome. Today, have we got slides? Yeah, we do have slides, excellent. So today I am going to be concluding my little sort of mini-series on choosing truth over lies. We looked previously at the lie that God doesn't speak to you, and we know he does. And we looked at the lie that I have to have it all together, or you have to have it all together, we have to be perfect, and we don't. And I wish I could say that today's lie is the last one, the only other one you ever have to worry about, but it's not. There are, after all, so many mistruths and sort of twistings of what we know that I could probably continue this series infinitely. Don't worry, I'm not going to, but I could. I will, however, try and sort of round the circle off with this lie today, this mistruth. The first two lies that we considered are themselves sort of intrinsically linked. I don't know if you sort of felt that as I was speaking about them, but I think that, in fact, this one as well will fit in quite nicely. But what I have discovered is often that once you've got one lie stuck in your brain, it's very much easier to get the rest of them stuck in there as well. So we thought about God doesn't talk to us. And of course, if you somehow find yourself believing that God doesn't speak to you, that he's not trying to communicate with you, suddenly that leaves the door open for all of the other lies, because you aren't receiving that truth. You are cut off from him. If you believe that you have to have it all together, that there is some sort of prerequisite for you to be loved by God, to be accepted into heaven, then again, you are separating yourself, and it becomes much easier to believe that maybe God doesn't speak to me, or maybe I'm not worth it. Maybe I am flawed beyond redemption. All of that is not true, of course. Okay? This lie may be one that you don't struggle with. It's certainly one that I have struggled with over the years. And it follows a similar pattern because, of course, if we feel like we're not worth it, if we feel like we're not enough, then suddenly it becomes much easier to believe that, you know, what other people say does matter. If God doesn't speak to us, that makes sense. You know, it's okay, it's fine. I'm not really worth his time, you know. And of course, it's actually a devilishly tricky thing, pun very much intended, to ascribe worth, to ascribe value to something, because we have such a weird world and people ascribe value to such weird things, sometimes wildly conflicting things. So I thought I'd start. I did in preparation for this, a Google search. It's a dangerous thing to do, believe me. It took me down some weird rabbit holes. But I searched for some strange things that had gone up at auction over the years. And I came up with 6 that I thought I'd like to highlight. I'm going to put the pictures up and I'll walk you through what they are, and then I'll tell you what the prices are, and you can be appropriately appalled. So just prepare yourself. Okay, number 1. I was blown away by this one, in fact. This is actually an art installation. It is a banana duct taped to a wall. It's called Comedian. And yes, this went up at auction, and yes, it did sell at auction. So yes, art installation number 1. Number 2, John Lennon's molar. Ugh, why? But it is something that went up for auction not so long ago. This is a piece of wedding cake. Queen Elizabeth's wedding cake, nonetheless, but it's a 65-year-old, well, it was a 65-year-old piece of wedding cake when it went up on sale. I can't imagine what it would taste like at this point, but well, yeah, well, maybe not. But actually, I'll come back to it. I saw William and Kate's wedding cake has also gone up for auction, and that one did a lot better. So I don't know what that says, but this is the world's largest cat painting. It comes in at a weight of 227 pounds, which I could divide by 14 and turn into stone if I had my calculator, but I don't. But it is about 2 meters by 3 meters big, and they had to get a specially reinforced wall just to hang it. This is the very first Superman comic. I can slightly get on board with this one a bit more, but it's number 1. And this is Queen Victoria's undies. Also went on sale at auction. So, are you ready for the prices? This is where it gets interesting. Okay, the banana duct tape to a wall, $120,000. I mean, I know they say cars depreciate when you drive them off the lot, but like, a banana goes bad very quick. Surely it's not going to last. Well, it's true, yeah. 31,200 for John Lennon's molar. I think, so it was actually bought by a Canadian dentist who apparently plans to like try and clone him or something, but yeah. A little bit more reasonable, but the slice of wedding cake only went for about £1,000. William and Kate's went for double, but £1,000 for a slice of wedding cake. The cat painting, you'll love this one. $826,000. I said pounds for the last one, didn't I? Oh, well. 826,000. That is a lot. The Superman comic, as I said, I could get on board with this one, and I was feeling it until the price. Yeah, that's you got to be really invested to do that, pay that, don't you? And the undies were $16,300. So, from this, what can we draw? People are weird, and the money they'll pay for things is even weirder, okay? The things that people ascribe value to is very, very strange. And so, if we think about how people ascribe worth, how people ascribe value to this random collection of junk, then how do they do it to other people? Like, what do we use to describe a person's worth? It could be, and I feel like I don't actually have to do this bit because you did a very nice job earlier. It could be how much money they have, or how much their life aligns to societal norms. You know, that person's really got it all together. Got the nice house, the nice car, the nice job. I myself am not a car person. I feel like it's got to get me from A to B. But I was at a client's site, and he recently bought like a 110,000 electric Porsche, and I was just like, why? You don't need that to drive to work. But anyway. Or maybe it's about how famous they are or how much influence they have. I'm fairly certain that our lovely politicians feel like they might be worth a little bit more than somebody else because they have that power to change things. Or it boggles my mind when I look at some celebrities out there and I wonder, why are these people celebrities? I've never understood the Kardashians. You can explain it to me afterwards, but like, I don't know why these people are celebrities. But we would say that they have a net worth that is potentially higher than ours. Or I remember when Facebook and Twitter started to become a thing, it was like a really big deal, like how many followers or how many friends you had. And, there was like a competition going in schools and stuff like that. Oh, I've got like 400 friends, and I've got 500 friends, or whatever. And that was the sort of premium way you could say, oh, I'm cool, or whatever. I was not cool. But beside the point. For me, then, this lie that I'm not really worth it, that I'm not really enough, is one that's always kind of stuck with me. I've always been a guy that struggles with sort of self-confidence. I'm very much a behind-the-scenes sort of person. I'm the lighting and prop guy in the panto, and I like doing the AV sort of stuff because it means I don't have to talk to people, and they don't have to talk to me, right? But it's always something that I've kind of struggled with. I like to say, I often say that I'm okay at a lot of things, but I've never really mastered anything, I've never really found that one thing that I'm like, yes, that is what I am awesome at, and nobody can beat me at that, yeah. And so this is one that I've struggled with, and it may not be one that you sort of struggled with as much, but for me, this sort of lie is the one that kind of potentially even underpins most of the other ones that I struggle with, because this idea that I may not be enough means that I struggle to feel like I'm enough for God, right? The culture we live in, though, unfortunately, is one that is full of dissatisfaction, consumerism, all that sort of jazz. We are made to think that we just need this extra little bit, or we can if we get that nicer house, or if I get this beautiful tie, or whatever it might be, I don't know, whatever floats your boat, that we'll somehow then be happy, that will fill that sort of hole, that need inside of us that we may not ultimately recognize. And we seek meaning, we seek our worth, and we root our confidence in places that more often than not are not the right ones. And when we look for sort of validation, and we do that, it generally doesn't always end well. It generally doesn't end well. So as I've kind of repeatedly said a few times now in the last few services, I used to be a teacher. And believe me, it is not good for your self-worth being a teacher. The things kids come out with when they aren't happy with you is not pleasant. I won't say some of the insults that I've been thrown at, because it would not be appropriate. But again, beside the point. What people do ask me, though, is, why did you leave teaching? And I have a litany of reasons why. Marking. Nobody likes marking. Oh, it's brutal. And then you do it, and you go into school, and they look at it briefly, and then it's done, and it's gone, and you spent hours, and it's just not really worth it at all. I say that there's a certain element of political savviness required in a school, because everybody's trying to sort of climb up that greasy ladder to the SLT so that they can have a say in what happens, and so that they don't actually have to be in the classroom anymore. It's also true, and another reason why I left. Or maybe it's just because I really like data. I am a bit more of a data guy. I like tracking attendance figures and marks and that sort of thing. So all of those are true. But ultimately, the real reason I left teaching was that it was not a healthy workplace. I mean, maybe some schools are, but the one I was at the time was not a healthy place to be. There was a lot of just casual expectation that you would kind of go above and beyond what was actually asked of you initially, that you would put in your overtime to do clubs, that you would work weekends or work whatever, just that you'd come in the holidays to do revision sessions. And actually, that's not the end of the world, because most people don't become teachers for the great salary, because it isn't one. And you very quickly learn that you don't become a teacher for the great holidays, because you've always got marking to do in the holidays, right? And the reason you become a teacher is because you are invested in the people that you are teaching. You want to help them, you want to guide them, and you are invested in their futures. And so you don't necessarily mind doing all of that stuff, right? The problem comes when that expectation is there, but never any recognition. And I'm not saying that you have to have your name sung from the rooftops, because you don't. But there was no affirmation of, or recognition that you'd actually done something extra. There was no recognition of when there was a good job at all. In fact, the only time I ever heard anything from the leadership was if they thought I hadn't done something right. And that's not healthy. That's not healthy. And unfortunately, another problem with schools kind of these days is that as academies take over and as they run them more as businesses, they're looking for a very specific type of person to be there teaching in their schools. And if you don't fit that mold, even if you do everything right, there's very much that sort of sense of, I'm the odd one out, I'm not in the right place. And so I did better than most. I lasted 7 years. Average is 5 years these days, and the government often says, I'm just going to leave that actually, because I could go on for hours about this, right? I lasted 7 years, so I beat the average, but a pervading sense of not really being wanted, because of course by the time I was 7 years in, I was more expensive than I needed to be. They'd rather have somebody younger and somebody fresh out who they could pay less money, right? A pervading sense of not really being wanted and sort of just, no real sort of affirmation whatsoever meant that it just wore me down a little bit. I said last time that I should have got out of teaching about 1.5 years before I actually did, and that God gave me a nudge, and well, this was the nudge, right? I ended up having a bit of a little breakdown, little mini, and had to take quite a significant chunk of time off work. And in the end, I handed in my notice and I never went back, because it was not healthy for me, and it was breaking me. It was. I had, without realizing, kind of attributed part of my identity, part of my worth, my value into that idea that I'm a teacher and I'm helping those kids, and that hadn't lasted, that had been eroded in that time. And so often we do that. We attribute our worth and our sort of sense of self to various ideals or things about ourselves, our jobs, or on a slightly lighter note, I realized a few years ago, and it was a gradual realization that I'm not the skinny guy that can just run 13 miles straight out the door anymore. I actually have to stretch before I go for a run, and that was a blow, I'll tell you. We attribute our sort of worth to these ideals, and when they no longer are there, it hurts. It hurts us. We need to seek our value in the Father, not in the world, because we are wonderful creations. Now, honestly, I still have to drive past the school on a fairly regular basis because it's on my way to Tesco for the shopping, and it still makes me a bit queasy. But despite this sort of utter unpleasantness of that situation, and it was probably one of the worst times of my life, God has worked it for good, because so I stopped teaching. I took some time off in sort of November, December, and I had actually an interview for my new job in February, which was very streamlined, and which, given the place that I was in, was something of a miracle that I actually pulled that off, because I'm not very good at interviews. But God made a way for me into this job, and since starting this job, it turns out I'm not useless. I've had nothing but positivity in this job, and work experience obviously helps when you're just being compared to fresh uni grads, but it's been nothing but positivity, and so I was put in mind of that saying, no news is good news, and it's not necessarily, it's not a way to live. No news is good news is not a great way to live, because research has suggested, and you'd think a school would know this, that it takes 7 positive things to outweigh 1 negative, right? That's so many. Like, how often do you hear 7 positive things for every negative thing you hear about yourself? It just doesn't happen, does it? So what we need to be doing is we need to look for our worth, our value in the right place. Ignore the fake news, to use a recent term. We have to look in the right place, and we have to build our confidence on the right foundation. We are children of God. Trust in him. He loves you, and in him you will find your true value. Our reading was from Jeremiah. Blessed are those who trust in the Lord and have made the Lord their hope and confidence. They are like trees planted along a riverbank with roots that reach deep into the water. Such trees are not bothered by the heat or worried by long months of drought. Their leaves stay green and they never stop producing fruit. No news isn't necessarily good news. Good news is good news, and we have the best news. We are in receipt of the good news. God loves us. We are his children, and when we root ourselves in him, we will weather the storms. Seek your value in the Father, for you are a wonderful creation. Now, we looked at the start at those auction items, and, people spend money on weird things. We've kind of sort of worked that one out. But that is, of course, another way in which things are ascribed value, the price that is paid for something. And, of course, value fluctuates depending on demand in our world these days. But once we start looking for our value in the right place, of course, we begin to see the scale of the price that was paid for us. Right? A price that is beyond our understanding or our imagining. Our reading from Peter said, "For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. He was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake. Through him you believe in God, who raised him from the dead and glorified him, and so your faith and hope are in God." We are fearfully and wonderfully made. We are made in the very image of God, and the price that has been paid for us was Jesus. And it was incredible, and I cannot even begin to comprehend what that price actually was. I don't think anyone can except for God. But it was certainly more than the 120 grand that was paid for that banana duct tape to a wall. So good news, you're worth more than a banana duct tape to a wall, right? Good, I'm glad you knew that already. You have been bought with a price infinitely high, and therefore you are consequently worth infinitely more. Seek your value in the Father, because you are a wonderful creation. So the final point I kind of want to make today is that we know that we need to look for our worth, our value in the right place. We know that we have been bought with an outstanding price. But another way you can tell the worth of something, the value of something, is how it's kept. Now, again, it's already been established, a bit of a control freak. I can be very precious about my stuff, very, very precious. I'm always super careful with my sort of technology, my bits and pieces, that they stay in good nick, and beat myself up if I do some damage to something. I accidentally reversed into a bin the other day, and it's haunted me ever since. I was also far too proud of myself when I last took my laptop into the Apple store, and they were like, "Whoa, this is great, Nick. There's no scratches around the ports." I was like, yes, that's right. I got this. But many people, they sink hours into caring for the things that are important to them. They might spend lots of time washing and buffing and waxing their cars, or tending in their gardens, or, I've seen kids at school get little wet wipes out and wipe down their phone screens and stuff like that, because of course that is the most important thing to them at the time. And so the things that we care about, we put time into. By contrast, some people care not a drop for some things, and it has literally made me wince when I've seen some of the smashed devices and things like that people carry around, and they obviously just don't care, and fair play to them, but I'm like, can't even imagine it. But unlike our poor attempts at keeping things, because ultimately we'll always, ding something or whatever, we ourselves are kept with the utmost care by our Father. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 10 says, "He found him in a desert land, and in the waste, howling wilderness. He led him about. He instructed him, and he kept him as the apple of his eye." It's from the Old Testament. It's talking about God's relationship with Israel, but of course it applies even now to the wider church and to us. If you'd prefer something a little bit more literal, 1 Peter 5 verse 7 says, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." There you go. Nice and plain. He cares for you. And not only does God care for us, he also provided someone to watch over us. He gave us the Holy Spirit. Romans chapter 8 says, "In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." It's the ultimate nanny. The level of care that is devoted to us by our Father is that of children. We are children of God. We are cared for and valued as such. And there can be no higher value than being a child of God. Seek your value in the Father, for you are a wonderful creation. Now, as always seems to be the case with these sorts of things of import, it's easy to know them up here, but very hard to accept them in here. And as I was considering this sort of message today, I was put in mind of this whole idea of sort of judging others. And, growing up, it's always like, oh, you mustn't judge others. We mustn't judge others, the speck in their eye versus the plank in our eye, that sort of thing. And, fair play, it's very true. But then I was thinking at the same time, why do I therefore spend so much of my time worrying about what others are thinking and judging me about, right? How are they in any better a position to judge than me? And of course they're not. We are human. We are flawed and imperfect. We are not in a position to judge anyone. The only value, the only worth, the only judgment that matters is that of God. And he has already said that he cares for you. Seek your value in the Father. You are a wonderful creation.